I am so honored to be here this morning, and really, when I just look at all of you, I have a huge grateful heart because it is because of your presence and your connection and your dedication and energy to all of our children and adolescents that are walking into our schools and into our communities with, just like we all do, some adversity. So this morning, what I would like to do in this very quick keynote is to talk about what educational neuroscience is, and then how I'm actually using and implementing everything I'm talking to you about today in the schools. Because when I came to Butler a year ago, when Dr. Shelley offered me a full-time faculty position, I said to her, Ina, I would love to come to Butler, but I have to stay in the classroom. So for 5 years, Marion University gave me a course release 4 years ago, and I returned to a large public school system, diverse public school system in Washington Township, where I spent 2 mornings a week in 7 schools, along with my graduate and my undergraduate courses. And then last year when I came to Butler, I was given the opportunity to be at IPS School 60, the Butler Lab School. And I was a little leery about going to the Butler Lab School just because I thought, I think this school has so much support and so many resources, and I want to go someplace in IPS that doesn't have all of that support. But I was very, very wrong. And so what I want to share with you today is that, I don't need this right now, I'm going to throw that down. What I want to share with you today is what I learned in the 5th and 6th grade when I entered last year. 1/3 of those students walking into the 5th and 6th grade classrooms were carrying in significant adversity. These were students that were coming in with a lot of anxiety. And what the research tells us right now in the United States, we have over 15 million children and adolescents with a mental emotional disorder that is significantly affecting the way they behave, the way they relate to others, and the way they learn. We also know that 27 to 32% of students walking into our schools today are carrying in significant anxiety. And I am seeing that even at the undergraduate level. And also this morning, I want to share with you, this is not about just our students. This is about you today. This is about your brain health and your brain state. And when we are feeling calm, when we are feeling regulated, we have so much more to give to our students. So I want you to think about that today as I speak about adversity. Many of our teachers, our educators, counselors, social workers are experiencing some significant secondhand trauma today because of what is being asked of us to do in this time when we have children and adolescents that are bringing in this anxiety. In fact, really, our new learning disability today has become anxiety in our classrooms across the country. And the good news, after I give you these kind of dire statistics, the good news is applied educational neuroscience and how brain science is informing us as educators. It's leading edge. We are in the forefront of something very, very significant, and I'm just so excited to share that with you today. So I brought these shoes, and I want you to take a look. One is pretty battered. And the other one is pretty, I mean, it's nice, it's shiny, it's worn, but it's not too worn. It's very comfortable, nice laces. And so what I want you to do at your table for about 10, 12 seconds, I want you to talk to each other for a minute. What do these have to do with the brain and the stress response system and looking at our children and our adolescents and ourselves when we are carrying in some pretty significant negative emotion? So just take it, just like 30 seconds. Just talk Just what would these have to do? Take a guess. The brain loves to make predictions and loves to guess. Okay, so I'm going to bring you back. I just completed a graduate course, a very condensed week-long course last week at Butler. Butler University has created a certification for everyone, mental health clinicians, educators, anyone who would like to be certified in this. And we just finished our very first course of 3 last week. And so I promised myself over the weekend I would not look at any texts, I would not review any documentaries, I would just really try to relax. So as I was taking a walk with Nellie, one of my flip-flops a mile into the walk broke. And so I found myself with my toes curled, and I found myself walking kind of funny, trying to keep that flip-flop on. And I came home and I thought about how stress affects our brain and how chronic, toxic adversity literally shapes neural connections in the brain. I want you to think of these 2 shoes as the stress response in our bodies. And what we know is that chronic adversity, and I'm going to use that word more than trauma today because we're going to talk about what that is, but chronic adversity changes not only how our bodies perceive the world, but it changes how we think, how we feel. And so when I look at this shoe, which is the stress response, what happens is as it becomes worn, as the shoelaces begin to fray, as the tongue is halfway out of the shoe, as I lose the sole of the shoe, I get used to this. And it feels comfortable and it feels familiar. And even though this shoe looks battered and worn, it's mine and it feels okay. And what I see every day when I go into the schools and when I meet with educators across the country and beyond is that this is that toxic adversity and scared, negative emotions. Scared children return to homes and environments that we would say might not be so nurturing. But what we know is that that shoe, that stress response, has a new allostasis. It's a new normal. And when we try to connect and build relationship with a child or adolescent who's experiencing significant adversity, that feels very unfamiliar. And we know all behavior is communication, and children and adolescents many times come into our schools not trusting adults because they haven't had the experiences in their growing and developmental years where they have attached and connected and built relationships so that their emotions are regulated. So when we give them a new shoe, when we give them an opportunity, when we give them connection and relationships, sometimes that new shoe feels awful. Because our brains have wired based on our experiences. Go ahead and stand up. This is not the way you learn, sitting on your butt. Stand up. Actually, after 20 minutes, the oxygenated blood flow has moved to your butt and left your forehead. So I want to share something with you today that is so, so important. If you leave this room with nothing more, the brain is experience dependent. It is the only organ in our bodies when we are born that is not developed. It is underdeveloped, and it develops based on experiences. And the best news for us, those of us who sit beside children in adolescence, is that every experience we create with a child structurally and functionally changes brain architecture. It changes it. And neuroplasticity is that. We have the ability through connection with a look, with a handshake, with a touch, with kind words, or just our tone of voice, how we really welcome that child into an environment changes that architecture. And the resiliency research, I'm going to give you the good news right now. The resiliency research is clear. Even if a child or adolescent comes from significant adversity, one healthy connection with a caregiver literally shapes the trajectory of that child's life and can change that swollen, as my little third grader said, that swollen limbic brain that is in its fight, flight, freeze response. So while go ahead and have a seat. Go ahead and put your hand on your forehead. Right here. Right here. Just shout this out. What part of the brain is this? This is the frontal lobe, right here. And this is the part of the brain where we do life and where we do school. So right here, does anyone just shout out, when is this finished developing? So in the past couple of years, we've heard 25. Now, for a variety of reasons, that development has gone up to about 28, 29, late 20s, 30, for men, sometimes 40. I'm kidding. But this frontal lobe right here is appropriately underdeveloped, and we know that children and adolescents walk in with those functions of emotionally regulating and paying attention, problem solving, goal setting, working memory. Everything we need to do life in school is right here in that frontal lobe, and it is completely underdeveloped. And when there's been adversity in the environment, that actually stagnates development, as does for our adolescents with drug and alcohol use. So development is messy. It's not linear, it's just chaotic. And we see children, big bodies of 13 and 14-year-olds. My 5th and 6th graders this year looked like young men, but their behavior just, was very, very young, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so what we know is that deep in the brain stem and deep in the limbic system, we have a center, 2, 1 in each temporal lobe, and these are the nuclei of the amygdala. Now, I want to be very specific. The stress response starts in the brain stem in an area called the locus ceruleus. But we are teaching children and adolescents, this is a part of applied educational neuroscience. We're teaching them about their neuroanatomy. We're teaching them about their brains. When I go into IPS 60, the very first thing we talk about is, what circuit are you running this morning? And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to go through a lot of strategies in the breakout session, but I'm going to share a couple at the end of this presentation. But we teach students about their amygdala. They know that that's their fight, flight, freeze response. And so I never match my PowerPoint. This is why I need one. I'm forgetting that I'm even having one here. So let me, okay, we'll leave it there just for a second. So this amygdala is your fight, flight, freeze. And when it's firing, when those circuits are running, that frontal lobe goes offline. That there's no activation in the frontal lobe. I don't care what you have planned as a teacher for learning that day, or as a counselor or social worker, what type of group work you have planned. When that child walks in tired, lack of sleep is a stress response brain state. Chronic lack of sleep raises adrenaline and cortisol in the brain and body. Not getting enough food, nutritious food, raises cortisol. We call that ambient developmental stress. And so those are the small stressors. But what we know is when that area is activated, when that brainstem is sending messages saying, this doesn't feel safe, this does not feel familiar, that amygdala starts firing and the frontal lobe shuts off and shuts down. So what is this about this morning? Why am I up here? This is changing everything. This is not a program I'm talking about today. This is not something that we're asking educators to put in. This is not developmental design or responsive classroom. This is a framework. It's really a discipline for how we sit beside students in relationship and in content. So I want you to think about this. It's just a way of being. And what we know today, with 10 out of 30 students that are coming in, carrying in that anxiety and that stress, their brains are not primed to learn. They don't have the architecture to learn anything. So what I would like for you to do, I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to think about this. Instead of asking what is wrong with this student, I want you to think about two other questions that we can begin to ask looking at adversity and the brain and learning. I want you to think about this question: what happened to the student? Not what is wrong with this student, but what happened to the student, and what is the student's story? What is the student's story? Because what we understand is that attachment is the carrier of all development. And attachment is the context for development. Because the brain develops from the back to the front and from the inside out. And many of our students are coming in not even able to regulate. They're coming in reacting and hot. And they're coming in with brain circuits that have connected and are firing just like we all have habits. They're firing in the limbic brain, in that amygdala area. So I want you to turn to the person next to you. And I want you to, just for about 30 seconds, one of you is going to talk and one of you is going to listen. Because again, talking at someone is not the way the brain learns. And I want you to share your biggest takeaway in this 15 or 20 minutes, but you cannot use the words I, and, the, or is, and don't write that down. I, and, the, or is. Just talk about your biggest takeaway. One of you is going to talk, the other one's going to listen. So find your person next to you just for about 20 seconds. Your biggest takeaway, but you cannot use the words I, and, the, or is. All right? And you can do it as you can do it if there's three. Go. Okay, I'm going to bring you back. So, come on back to me here. Now the other, if that was difficult, then it should have been. That's not how we talk. I know that for at least a couple of seconds, I had 100% engagement. And what that was that you just did is a brain interval. And what we know, this is not an added extra or a warm fuzzy. A brain interval actually brings novelty, and it allows the brain to really predict and kind of think about something very different. And actually, after we have taught something brand new, the brain uses a brain interval to process what's just been taught subconsciously. So it's a great way. We are using brain intervals in classes every half hour, every 40 minutes, because it really wakes up the brain. Routine lulls the brain to sleep. And the brain is wired for what? Why do we have a brain? What's the number one reason we have a brain? Survival. Survival. So we pay attention to everything that feels unfamiliar, that feels a little threatening, a little unsafe, and you just paid attention because I asked you to do something on a Tuesday morning that no one's ever asked you to do before, to talk that way. So you were all paying attention just for a couple of minutes, a little bit more. Now, the person who was just sitting back and laughing and listening, it's your turn. So what you're going to do is I brought one of my favorite beings from Pixar in the whole world. So I want you to share who this is and why the hell did I bring this morning to this conference. Just take a guess, predict, and you get about 20 seconds. So who is this? So go ahead and tell your partner. And why? What does this have to do with the brain? Okay, go ahead and come back. So, who is this? This is Bong from probably my favorite, well, not my favorite, but one of my most favorite films. And Inside Out came out 2 years ago, this summer. And Bong, for those of you who have not seen the film, in the electronic book that you will get, that was published by Presence Learning, I've developed 5 consecutive lessons from this film that really can be embedded and integrated into K through 12 instruction. Bong is Riley's imaginary friend in this film. And Riley is 11 years old, turning 12 at the end. And Bong represents why I went into 5th grade when Marriott University and Butler University gave me that course release. Bong represents that death of childhood and that birth into adolescence. And what we are not trained to understand and know deeply as educators is that between 9 and 10 years old and 11 years old is the second greatest time of brain change. And how many of you teach or work with students in a certain capacity between 4th grade and 9th grade? Raise your hand. So this is a very, and again, I even hate to say freshman, it could go up even higher. But what we know is that at that time, the brain loses 50 to 80% of its gray matter. So we have children and adolescents walking around with half their minds, if not more than half their minds. And teachers probably have about the same working with those students. And what I want you to understand is that's why I did go into 5th grade in Washington Township. I was at Crooked Creek and Nora Elementary and Fox Hill, and then moved into the middle school to work with the middle school 7th and 8th graders. But what I want to share with you is that the brain is, as I said, is built from the back to the front and from the inside out. And so what we know is that in that time, myelination is when we get really good at something. So what I want you to do right now is hold up your arms like this, make this model. This is the axon of a neuron. This is the cell's body. This is the nucleus. These are the dendrites. We know that we have about 100 billion neurons in the brain, 1 trillion glial cell, which are support cells for those neurons. And in this model, the aha moment when you learn something is when the axon sends an electrical signal to the cell body. The dendrites receive that information, but notice I'm not touching here. This is called the synaptic cleft, and this is where that chemical exchange of neurotransmitters happens. So the axon sends it, the dendrites receive it. We have an electrical chemical connection here in the brain. And what we know is that when we learn something over and over and over again, it puts this protein coat, this fatty protein coat on the axon, and it's like a conductor of electricity. And the more you do something, the better you get at it. And so even if they are habits that you don't want anymore, the more that you do something, the better you are at that too. So what we understand is that in that teenage adolescent brain, starting at 4th or 5th grade, what you use gets stronger, and what you stop doing gets pruned away. So I say to my 6th grade boys, they tell me they want to play pro basketball, they want to be pro football players, but they're going home after school and playing video games all afternoon. And I've said to them, and they get this, you know, you can't be playing Minecraft and thinking that you want to play professional sports. Your brain doesn't work that way. What you use gets stronger. That is called consolidation. When anything that we're not using gets pruned away, and proliferation means we build those myelinated axons, so the brain loses capacity, but it gains efficiency. And that's that brain change in that adolescent brain. So what we know is that to make a new neural connection feel sometimes awful and uncomfortable, because our brain has become very used to how we think, how we behave, and how we feel. So I want you to hold up your pinky of one hand, hold up your thumb. And right now, you're going to do something maybe that you haven't done before. And what I want you to do is, as fast as you can, switch, keeping all other fingers down. So switch back and forth. No other fingers. And this does not count. I don't want to see this. It's this. This is another brain interval. I have a lot of myelin on these connections because I do this at almost every presentation. We've been practicing. But that's making a new connection. The neurons in your brain mean nothing by themselves. So you need to practice to get a little bit better. I want to share with you what's up here in the PowerPoint. And this PowerPoint can be yours too, because I'll never get through every slide. But I want to share with you today what we are understanding, and I'm going to talk to you about the stress response a little bit and what we can do as teachers. Because it's one thing to hear about trauma or adversity, and you all know that, but what do we do? So I'm going to spend time now talking about that. If you lack a deep memory of feeling safe and loved, the receptors in the brain that respond to human kindness literally fail to develop. We know that empathy is a prefrontal cortex area. We know empathy is that ability to feel someone else's feelings. But if what we want from a child has never been modeled, if what we want has never been taught, then those neural circuits never develop. And what I want to share with you, as you can see on the screen, the opposite happens. When we feel safe and when we feel loved, the receptors in the brain that help us to develop cooperation and help us to develop that ability to be creative get stronger. So what we understand is most, if not all, negative behavior arises from a stress response. What does that mean? That means we have a very protective system in our body called the HPA axis. And that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is there to protect us. When we activate it over and over and over again, it literally damages brain tissue in the hippocampus. What is the hippocampus? This is huge for us to know. It's the area of the brain that looks like a seahorse. It sits next to the amygdala, and it's where we consolidate memory. And what we see in functional MRIs is that that hippocampus has a dense amount of these receptors, these glucocorticoid receptors, but stress, cortisol, and adrenaline literally kill off those receptors in the hippocampus. So I am concerned stress literally compromises memory in our children, in our adolescents. And so what we have to understand is that the good news is the neuroplasticity that the brain has. That literally the brain is built for repair, it's built for resiliency. But as when we are little, it has more plasticity. Now, I told you that the second greatest time of brain change is in that adolescent period, 9 to 15 or 16. The greatest time of brain change is that last trimester through the second year of life. And this is new research from Dr. Bruce Perry and Dr. Alan Shore and Linda Chapman. And this is where my work is. This is the epicenter of what I'm doing with teachers and I am doing as a teacher right now in the classroom. We see many of our children coming in with an activated right hemisphere. That amygdala feels swollen. That amygdala is constant. How many of you have kids who are just reactors? Who are just coming in? I mean, they don't think through. I mean, they're just, boom, reacting. What we know in that first greatest time of development is that the brain is more plastic, more malleable than any other time. And the right hemisphere comes online first. I didn't know this till 2 years ago. The right hemisphere is where we carry emotion, where we carry visual images, and where we carry implicit memory. So even a young baby who doesn't speak at 4 months old can hold significant adversity. And it has a huge effects on the sensory and motor systems of the brainstem. Because little babies need a gradual stimulation of those sensory and motor systems. I'm going to show you a 2-minute documentary from Harvard. We're trying to get Dr. Jack, well, I have better news than that. We tried to get Dr. Jack Shonkoff to Indianapolis this year, but I am so excited to share with you. April 14th at Butler, we have Dr. Bruce Perry coming next April. So a lot of his research, we're actually creating strategies in the schools right now, but I want to show you this 2-minute, it's called In Brief, The Science of Neglect, and I want you to take a look at this just for 2 minutes.
Everyone in a community has a vested interest in everyone else's children because everyone else's children determine the next adult population that makes for a successful society. Built into our biology is the need to have responsive interactions with adults.
Neglect for children is when they don't get what the brain is expecting to get, what the child is expecting to get, what we are biologically prepared and waiting for, which is input from those around us.
It's this back and forth serve and return interaction that literally shapes the architecture of the brain.
Serve and return begins when a child looks at something or observes something, makes an utterance, and that represents the serve. And the return is when the parent notices the child doing these things and responds to the child.
Under conditions where serve and return is broken, you literally are pulling away what is the essential ingredient of the development of human brain architecture.
It was a really compelling series of experiments where they started by videotaping the mother and the baby engaging in cooing and smiling. And then they asked the mother to basically put on a blank face and not respond at all. When a baby is not attended to, that is a sign of danger to the baby biologically. So the stress systems become activated.
In a brain that is constantly bathed in stress hormones, not that's up and down, that comes with normal development, certain key synapses, the connections between nerves, fail to form, and critical regions of the brain.
So neglect both fails to provide the stimulation that's needed to develop the basic architecture, and when it's at a certain level, is one of the most potent activators of the stress biology of a young child. So you get a double whammy.
Science points to 4.
So what I would like to share with you today is something that not only are we sitting beside educators and discussing and learning deeply, but we are sharing this with our students as young as preschool and 5. They are learning about their brain. They are learning about their triggers. They are learning about ways to regulate. And what we understand, unless we begin to prime the brain for learning, for relationships, and for behaviors, cognition is the very last part of development. And yet, look at the emphasis we place on test scores. Look at the emphasis we place on content. So if you hold your arms out like this, right here, even Abraham Maslow did not have it right. And I'm writing about that in Edutopia right now. We're revising that. Well, actually, he never created a pyramid for those science sticklers. We kind of created that pyramid. But what we know is that's not food and water and our physiological needs that's first. It's our need for attachment. It's our need for relationship and connection. That's first. The second piece of development is regulation, emotional regulation, teaching our children, even our children, and in the breakout session, we're going to see an 18-year-old that has never really learned how to regulate. And so what wasn't learned in those early first couple of years gets carried into adolescence, and it looks defiant and oppositional and shut off and shut down. It looks apathetic and unmotivated. But what we are seeing are children and adolescents that are walking in dysregulated. Their brains have wired to the perfect experiences. And the brain is a social organ. For me to stand up here today and to talk about the brain by itself is just inaccurate. The brain is built for a serve and return. The brain is built for connection and relationship. And when it doesn't get that, it literally struggles with behavior, with regulation. And so the strategies that we are teaching our pre-service teachers at Butler in the certification course, and what I'm going to talk to you today, are about priming the brain for learning. So let's talk about those right now. Well, how much time do I have left? How am I doing? 30, perfect. The amygdala's language is not words. How many people in the history of being told to calm down have ever calmed down? Nobody. When you try to talk a child or adolescent, when they're in their amygdala and you're in your amygdala, nothing good happens. So the amygdala, deep in each temporal lobe, responds, its language is feelings, and it responds, research points to 2 ways. I'm sure there are more than 2 ways, but 2 ways. At your table, talk. What are the 2 ways the amygdala calms down, the stress response calms down? So guess what those are. Just talk at your table for a minute, or even 10, 20 seconds. What do you think calms the amygdala? All right, so come back to me. So if we had more time, I'm going to go ahead and share with you. So those of you who said breath, You're exactly right. Breathing calms the stress system. And there are mindfulness programs popping up all over the country. People coming into our schools teaching mindful moments. But what I want to share with you is that doesn't make any difference. You can have all the great yoga and mindfulness programs. You can spend thousands of dollars on those. But unless the students know what's happening in their brains, unless we teach them about the amygdala and that prefrontal cortex, we even ask the kindergartners, what's the weather in your brain today? Is it partly sunny? Is it cloudy? Is there a thunderstorm going on? So we have to share a common language. Breath calms the amygdala. The second way the amygdala is calm is through movement. When we move, we release our stress. And those are some of the ways that we're incorporating these stress responses into our classrooms and our schools. So I just want to share movement and breath are research-based, and they calm the amygdala. Now, we are wired for survival first, and then what's the second reason that we have a brain? Shout it out. So emotion, feelings. And then the third and very last reason we have a brain is cognition. So from the research of Jill Bolte Taylor, we are teaching students this. We are feeling creatures who think. We are not thinking creatures who feel. We are feeling. We are wired to feel first, and our bodies have an incredible mechanism. Listen to this. Your body has the ability to rinse clear and clean of negative emotion in 90 seconds. It's called the 90-second rule. So why do we stay so shitty with each other for days and weeks and months and years? Why do you do that? What do? You tell somebody about it over and over again, or you rethink it. And every time you rethink, something bad happened to you. When you tell the story, your body doesn't know the difference between the actual event and your thoughts. Your thoughts actually, do you know that you have the best pharmacy in your brain of all pharmacies? Literally, your feelings, emotions are energy and motion, and they create these neurochemicals, and we literally can create cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline just by our thoughts. So when you think about something negative and you tell somebody about it and then you replay it in your mind, you keep that cascade of negative emotion flowing. And we are teaching students this. If I asked you right now to hold out and imagine a half of a lemon, and I had you close your eyes, and I had you take that half of a lemon up to your mouth, and I had you squeeze all that juice so that pulp and those seeds are just in your mouth, and I said to you, don't swallow. Keep it in your mouth. Feel those seeds between your teeth. Feel that pulp. Many of you would have extra saliva in your mouth, and many of you would see this. I would see this face. In fact, I did see the face. Some of you were even, I didn't even tell you to do it, and I saw your sour faces. But what we know is that the brain responds to thought, and that's why adversity and trauma can be held for a lifetime. The right hemisphere holds our emotions, our visual images, and it's our sense of body, mind, self. It comes on board in the first year of life. And the second year of life, the left hemisphere comes on. So we don't even have words to describe the adversity and trauma we've gone through until that second year of life. Broca's area, which is our speech expression area, does not develop until that second year of life. So what we know is that children and adolescents who come in carrying anxiety, who come in with negative emotion, are holding that in the right hemisphere. And talking doesn't get it out. So let's talk about strategies. We are teaching students, number one, about their neuroanatomy. And I'm going to go to a couple more slides. This is going to be my slide for my breakout too. Oh, good, I covered that. Okay, just bear with me just for a second. This makes me very happy that I've talked about this. You all will get this slide. You'll get the whole PowerPoint, because this is something I want you to share with your schools and your districts. By the way, 85% of the brain develops in those first 5 years of life. And listen to this. 80% of calls to Child Protective Services are about neglect. And why is that a concern? 1 out of 4 children in our nation are growing up in significant poverty. These are parents or caregivers who love their kids like no other, but they are living in a means where they're working 2 and 3 jobs. And it's really hard to meet the needs of everybody when poverty is that prevalent. So looking at those statistics, poverty changes brain architecture. How many of you are familiar with the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences? So I'm not going to get into that today, but they've added 2 categories since that study came out 20 years ago. By the way, I was talking to my youngest daughter, Reagan, last night. I was kind of going over this presentation with her. And we looked at the study, 17,337 middle-class adults, averaging age 57. And this was how many years ago? 30 years ago, this study was conducted. Think about today if this study were conducted. Think about, I believe those categories. So the new categories that have been added are social rejection and poverty, socioeconomic challenges. So when we look at how adversity affects the brain, it's under the skin. So our strategies begin with teaching students about their neuroanatomy. I don't care if you teach AP history, AP biology, you teach PE, you teach English language arts. It doesn't matter. You begin for just a few minutes to talk to your students about the amygdala. We have our students, they will say to me and to the teachers I work with, you know what, I've downshifted and I need a minute or 2. Now, I'm going to talk about this in the breakout because you teach this as you would teach procedures in your classroom. When we teach about focused attention practices and when we teach neuroanatomy, these are like how you would teach procedures or transitions. So students are not taking advantage of this. They begin to use these. We even have teachers setting up amygdala first aid stations in their classrooms and amygdala resets. And for teachers, for our brains, we have amygdala first aid stations now in 6 of our schools. Maryville has started an amygdala for the teachers. So you come into this area, you put the beats on for like maybe a minute, 90 seconds, the 90-second rule. Have a couple of almonds, drink some water, take a couple of deep breaths. Because if I'm in my amygdala and that student is in their amygdala, nothing good is going to happen. We engage in power struggles because we personalize it and we get triggered by negative behavior. We misunderstand those behaviors. Those kids that look oppositional and defiant, when I've worked for 24 hours on this incredible lesson and I've got this behavioral engagement plan and a kid walks in and they are carrying a ton of negative emotion and that book is thrown or FU is shouted across the room, it doesn't feel good. And I get triggered too. So what we know is that when we teach students how to breathe, and we teach them in 5 ways, we have them focus on their breath, we have them focus on a stimulus, a sound, a taste, we use Altoid mints, we use pop rocks, just focusing on a stimulus to pay attention. Guess what that does? Meditation is exercising executive function. Meditation isn't religious. We can't call it that in Indiana because people get all weird about that, especially in school. So we call it in Washington Township focused attention practices. In Pike Township, we call it focused attention breaks. But we use sound, we use visualization, we use a taste, and we use our breath. And we teach the students how to exercise those executive functions. And can I tell you something? They love it. It's a process. It takes some time, but I can't tell you what it's doing for learning. And Deanna Nybarger is a 5th grade teacher in Washington Township who I worked with in that first year. She's now been hired by the district as a social and emotional educational neuroscience coach. And they have seen such success with this that she is working with all the schools in that district this fall. And we are teaching that district how to exercise executive function and sustained attention. So movement, having bell work that is brain aligned. So what we're doing is having students, the minute they come in for 7 minutes, their bell work is about building sensory and motor systems. So what are we doing? We're having them do bilateral scribbling. And they scribble for 30 seconds with 2 markers, 1 in each hand. I'm going to talk about this at the breakout. They go across and make arcs. They have so much fun. We have everyone has an affinity for animals. Even if you hate animals, you still have an affinity for not liking them. So we use animal totems in our bell work. We use art because to get your feelings and thoughts out of your head and out here is a relief. So movement and art and breath. And I want to show you a couple of slides. I want to show you what teachers are doing that really help us stay connected through the conflict. These 4 questions are driving our teaching with helping students and helping teachers to make sure the environment and also if you're an administrator, your classroom are your teachers. So does everyone feel important in here? Can I share my gifts with someone here? Can I influence my world here? And are my efforts recognized here? Those 4 questions are really helping us to stay connected through the conflict. So priming the brain for learning and regulating are some of the things that we're doing. Helping students identify their emotional triggers. And I want to go to this slide and looking at some strategies. I'm so happy that I've talked about all of this. Here's what we can do. The power of questions is about one of the most incredible vehicles for de-escalating the stress response and validation. If you see a child or adolescent who has not lost their words yet, they have not reached that point of no return, what we know is that when we ask a question, the brain processes it a lot longer than being told something. So I want to share a story with you. When our oldest son, Andrew, was a freshman at Lawrence Central High School, he went through a very, very difficult time. And being his mom and his dad and his siblings, we all, as a family system, went through a very difficult time. And I remember at that time, as our worlds felt that they were flipping and turning upside down, Andrew's 9th grade Spanish teacher, Mr. Pickett, he's since moved to Pittsburgh, on a Monday morning or a Monday afternoon, sent me an email. And in the subject line, it said, Andrew in action. And I thought, oh my God, do I want to open this now or do I want to wait? And at that point, I'll tell you what my trigger was. I still know this number. I think it's 964-7400. I think that's Lawrence Central's dean's office. I really, really do. It just came to my mind. That is a trigger for me. And I can kind of laugh about that now. Because there isn't a person in here who has not gone through significant adversity or stress at one time or another. So anyway, I opened this email, and this is what Mr. Pickett said. He said, Dear Dr. Desautels, I want you to know that Andrew was working on his project today in Spanish. He completed it. He was smiling, and he was helping other groups. And then he said in the very last sentence, please let me know how I may serve you in the days and weeks to come. And that sentence changed everything for Andrew that semester and for me as his mom. Because we all saw negative with Andrew. The brain is wired with a negative brain bias. We're wired for that because of our survival response. But what happened was Mr. Pickett saw a diamond. And when I shared that with Andrew that semester, he rose to the occasion and got an A in that class. He failed every other class, but he got an A in Spanish. And what we know, How May I Serve You, turned into some research for me when I was at Marion with Eric Jensen. I actually was calling him weekly at the time, and Judy Willis. But I want to share with you 3 questions that upshift a child or an adult or an adolescent. And those questions literally shock somebody because they're ready for the fight, they defend, or they are ready to posture. So let's begin with these 3 questions. If a child or an adolescent can still hear you and have their words, when we ask, what do you need? There's a shift. How can I help? How can we make this better? What can we do together to make this better? How can I help? What do you need? And what can we do to make this better? We literally see an oxygenated glucose blood flow move from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex. You may not get an answer. You may get a head down, and you may get a look that doesn't make sense to you, but you've been heard. Because nothing matters more to the brain than feeling felt. Feeling felt drives our sensory and motor system, it heals the limbic brain, and it opens us up to learn, to problem solve, to pay attention. What do you need? How can I help? And what can we do to make this better? Focused attention practices, the power of questions, the power of stories. Stand up one last time for me. 15. What I want you to do is I want you right now to take, some of you are, I want you to take the stretch that you need, that you haven't had since Saturday. So I literally want you to take feel it, feel your body. Just really like move and just feel where that tension, where do you hold the tension in your body? And then I want you to take 3 of the deepest breaths, because most of us shallow breathe and we take in stale air. So I want you to really just take that inhale and exhale through your mouth or nose, but your shoulders should not move, and you should really be blowing up your belly, taking that oxygenated flow down to your belly and up to your frontal lobe. And take 2 more deep breaths, 2 more deep ones. One more. I want you to place your hands together, and I want you to rub them till they're hot. Literally till they're hot, till you can't, not this. Really till they're burning. Keep going. Hot, faster, faster. Keep going. Stop and just hold them. And just slowly hold, just pull them out, pull them out, pull them out, and just put them up. Take 2 more deep breaths. Have a seat. As I end these 12 minutes, I'm going to show you 2 minutes from a medical doctor called The Science of Adversity. Because what we now understand that we didn't understand just a few short years ago, it's not bad behavior from poverty or from those ACE categories. It's not the smoking or the drinking or the drugging. it's not bad behavior that we're seeing. Our neurobiology gets under the skin, and when the brain is malleable and plastic in those early years, brains wire to experiences. So our children have been misunderstood. They have been misdiagnosed. And how many of you have children or adolescents with an ADHD diagnosis? Raise your hand. How many of you have children ADD, ADHD? What we now are asking, is it truly attention deficit disorder? Because ADD and ADHD are neurogeneticist disorders. Or are we looking at post-traumatic stress in children where those symptoms look very, very similar? Being unable to focus and concentrate and hyperactive. It's a question worth thinking about, because we know trauma and adversity are held in the body. We know they affect the way we perceive the world. They affect our neurotransmitters, those neurochemicals. We have less serotonin, less dopamine, and we are constantly secreting those it's called neurohormones in the body, so I apologize for not being clear. Neurotransmitters in the brain, neurohormones in the body. And we know from Bessel van der Kolk's work that the body truly does keep the score. So I want to show you a couple of minutes looking at what we've talked about, and we're going to stop, and I want you to think about this. Where do you see the gap in your research, in this research, and where do you see the gap in that research and your practice? Because gaps are good. Gaps provide opportunities. If a child doesn't know how to ride a bike, we teach them. If a child doesn't know how to do an algebra problem, we teach them. If a child doesn't know how to behave, what do we typically do? We punish them. And children with pain-based behaviors, we actually exacerbate that pain because punishment doesn't work with children in pain. Punishment doesn't generalize, and punishment escalates that stress response. Children who come in with adversity ask, am I safe? Who can I trust? And when will this be over? Just like those tennis shoes when I was trying to walk in them. I was careful where I walked. I was careful who saw me. And my whole body changed in how I was handling just a simple step-by-step movement. So take a look at these 2 minutes.
The main subject that we're going to talk about today is how science explains the connection between poverty and school performance. One of the ways to understand the challenges in our schools is to look for patterns. Physicians often look for patterns because when you see a pattern, you can usually figure out the mechanism that explains that pattern. And if you can figure out the mechanism, you can often find a cure. So doctors really love patterns. So let's look at some numbers. When you look at schools in the United States where the poverty rate is less than 10%, our schools perform at the highest level of any country in the world. Now, that's not what you read in the newspapers. In the newspapers you read, American education is going down. But if the poverty rate climbs past 50%, that's when you see the drops in academic performance to 17th in reading, 27th in math, 20th in science, despite spending more per student than any other country in the world. Another set of numbers to look at are the stats associated with U.S. poverty. Today, 51% of children in public schools live in low-income households, the highest percentage since the federal government began tracking this figure. What this translates into is 47,000 schools in the United States that have a majority of students from low-income households. When you think about that, and you think about the challenge that that presents to our teachers today, it is something very, very different in the ways in which teachers need to be prepared for that challenge. The science of adversity and stress helps us to explain the challenges that we see in our classrooms and the challenges that we see in our children. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are sudden, traumatic, overwhelming events in children's lives, like being the victim of abuse or witnessing the violent death of a loved one. One of the things that we know is that when children have greater than 4 ACEs, they are at extremely high risk for health issues and far more likely to act out with drugs, with alcohol, with smoking. For kids that are exposed to greater than 6 ACEs, a person can expect to have a lifespan that's actually 20 years shorter. So the picture that we see is higher risk for health, higher risk for learning issues, and higher risk for actually premature death. So what sits underneath all of this? Something that we know is that adversity doesn't just happen to children. It happens inside their brains and bodies through the biologic mechanism of stress. Stress causes the release of...
So as we end this keynote today, the good news is this. We are beginning to understand what lies under the skin and the neurobiology of the stress response. But what we also know is that there is a neurobiology of trust and connection. And the good news is that through neuroplasticity, through the experiences that we create, through the connections we hold steady through the conflict, we change brain architecture. Resiliency, we have the capacity for it. We have the brain architecture for it, but many times it lays dormant in the brain, needing connection, needing relationship. So the strategies through focused attention practices, through teaching students about their neuroanatomy, through looking at how we can process a conflict together. We call these dual brain sheets, where when a conflict happens with a student, I model the behaviors I want to see. Even if I don't think I did anything wrong, I can do it better. So when a student is filling out one of those ridiculous thought sheets or think sheets, I'm filling one out too. We are noticing what's going right and well. We have noticing slips. Even if a child is suspended or an adolescent is suspended, we notice 2 things good that happened that day and then they still are suspended. We are looking at how can I take your order. You know the guest checks, you know when you go out to dinner and those guest checks, we're actually using those in the classroom and we're choosing students maybe 2 a day, maybe 10 a week, and we're saying to that child or that adolescent, I'm going to take your order today. They love this. They think this is so funny because I say to them, I may not have this. It may be out of order. It may not be in stock. We may not have it in the kitchen. But I'm going to take your order anyway, and I'll see what I can do. And so some of the orders I get, and it's on this PowerPoint, but I'm running out of time. One is, give me a break. I need to go to the bathroom one more time. What's the big deal? I need you to notice when I'm frustrated. Don't give me so many math problems. I hate surface area. Can we do something different about, it's hilarious. But we laugh and we stay connected through taking your order. So these are the strategies I'm going to talk about today during the breakout, but the strategies are in the ebook. So they are behavioral, emotional, and connection strategies for you. And is my time over? Okay. Okay, 5 minutes. So let me show you. Oh, here it is, the dual brain sheets. So these are the questions that I fill out along with my students. What was our challenge? What led up to this challenge? And how do we handle this together or apart? Could we have prevented this problem? And what are 2 adjustments we will make the next time? I have to tell you a funny story. Jeremiah, one of my students, my 6th graders last year, I got to be with the 5th and 6th graders the entire academic year. And he was really, really struggling, and I just learned this a couple of weeks ago. Jeremiah was adopted when he was 3 years old, and he was adopted from significant adversity and neglect into his home. And for whatever reason, I didn't understand it, because I was in there only 2 mornings a week. But every time I came in, the month of April, he had this great big pink bathrobe wrapped around him, and he was swinging it at the other kids. And we had a substitute. The 5th and 6th grade classroom really went through a hard time this semester because we had 2 different teachers, or this last academic year, and then we had a sub in there the last. So anyway, he was just it looked so oppositional and defiant. I was so angry with Jeremiah. His behavior was constantly disrupting my teaching. I was so triggered. So 2 things I want to tell you. I'll go back to the pink blanket, but I want to tell you this. So we started filling these out. Jeremiah and I did together. And I said to him, Jeremiah, here's my challenge. I only was with your class 2 mornings a week. I was so excited. I came in ready to teach about the brain, and it just felt like every time I came in, you just were like trying to stop me from teaching. I felt so upset by that. So I was very transparent with Jeremiah, and he was transparent with me, so things got better. But then all of a sudden, there was a pattern. Now, remember when I told you about patterns and gaps? The pattern was Jeremiah was getting a lot of attention from me. And I found myself filling this out almost every time I was there. So it was like the behavior was getting better, but then when he wasn't getting the attention he needed, then we went back again. But what I learned about Jeremiah was the other boys were making fun of him because he was a little bit overweight and he had big man breasts. I don't know a better way to say that. So he was covering them up with the pink blanket. So he wasn't being oppositional or defiant. He was so self-conscious of how he looked, and he was holding that blanket around him. And I thought to myself, Lori Desautels, you go out and you present, and you always tell the people that listen to you, all behavior is communication, and I forgot about that with Jeremiah. He was communicating something very important in those last couple of weeks of school. So what I want to share with you today is that we can create proactive, brain-aligned, small, medium, and large systems in our classrooms, in our schools, in our practices. And those are in the ebook. I'm developing those right now, backup systems too that are brain-aligned. What does that mean? The brain naturally learns and relates when it feels safe, when it feels something is familiar, and when it feels connected and loved. So my goal this year with my undergraduate students and with IPS School 60, I'm going to be with 2 new 5th grade classes this year. My goal is to focus on the resiliency of hope, because there's a neurobiology underneath it. It's not trite or fluffy. It is real. And when we feel connected, we have an opportunity to change brain architecture. So as I end, there it is. Take your order. And I don't know how we want to do this, Norma, but I brought our new book. Actually was published a year ago, and I want to give one away. But there are too many of you to pick a number between 1 and 100. So I want to share this and give it away. And do I have time just to share one story as I end? So this is actually a story that you could share with students if you modify the words a little bit. But when I think about the adolescent brain and I think about the resiliency of childhood and the plasticity and malleability of brain architecture, Erik Erikson got it right. What he said was, in this time of early adolescence, we're really trying to figure out who we are, what's our identity, and how can we kind of muddle through role confusion. So I want to share a story with you that I want to close with today. There is a tribe where the birth date of a child is counted not from when they were born, nor from when they were conceived, but from the day that the child was a thought in its mother's mind. And when a woman decides that she will have a child, she goes off and sits under a tree by herself, and she listens until she can hear the song of the child who wants to come. And after she's heard the song of this child, she comes back to the man who will be the child's father and teaches it to him. And then when they make love to physically conceive the child, some of that time they sing the song of the child as a way to invite it. And then when the mother is pregnant, the mother teaches that child's song to the midwives and the old women of the village, so that when the child is born, the old women and the people around her sing this child's song to welcome it. And then as the child grows up, the other villagers are taught the child's song. If the child falls or hurts its knee, someone picks it up and sings its song to it. Or perhaps the child does something wonderful or goes through the rites of puberty, then as a way of honoring this person, the people of the village sing his or her song. In the African tribe, there is one other occasion upon which the villagers sing to the child. If at any time during his or her life the person commits a crime or aberrant social act, the individual is called to the center of the village and the people in the community form a circle around them. Then they sing their song to them. The tribe recognizes that the correction for antisocial behavior is not punishment. It is love, and it's the remembrance of identity. When you recognize your own song, you have no desire or need to do anything that would hurt another. And it goes this way through their life. In marriage, the songs are sung together. And finally, when this child is lying in bed ready to die, all the villagers know his or her song, and they sing for the last time the song to that person. As you leave here after this conference and finishing up each session, I want you to think about where are your gaps, because where there's a gap, there's an opportunity. So I want you to think about that space in a place where we build connection, where we really begin to look at all behavior as communication, knowing that every single child will always choose to look misbehaved before they look stupid in front of their peers. So thank you for having me, and thank you, Norma, and thank you, Susan and Dan, for the wonderful introduction, and I hope you have a great couple of days. Thank you.